is Roberta Peel from Oregon Trail Silver, and I've had a lot of questions about the bezel, the tube bezel setting. This is it's called a bezel setting punch. Anyhow, it's a nice little set. I think there's 18 pieces in here. It goes from 0.75 to 7.75. I picked this one up at Kent's Tools. So today I cut out a couple little pieces from a powder pancake die using one of my texture plates. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a tube to set these tiny little blue sapphires. Okay, so first thing that we're going to need obviously is whatever it is that you're going to try and tube set onto. Second is you're going to need to get yourself some tubing. This is heavy walled sterling silver tubing. Okay, it's from Rio Grande. So the rule of thumb is, for example, for a 2mm stone, you want to go a 1/2 millimeter larger on the outer diameter. Okay, because the walls are a half millimeter. All right, so the best way to check and make sure that that's actually going to fit, and I have a whole collection of these, of the different size tubing. The best way to check and see if it's going to fit is to set the stone in the middle and make sure that there's room to cut the seat and press the bezel wall over, okay? All right, so that's our rule of thumb. That looks like a good set. Now here's the thing, if your stone starts to fall through the hole, obviously it's going to be too big. But this sits very, very nicely right on top when you can get it that way. So anyhow, first thing that we're gonna do, see how it just sits very nicely right there in the middle? Okay, so the first thing that I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take the tube itself. You wanna make sure it's pretty level. I have some 180 grit sandpaper because sometimes when you saw these, they don't exactly saw level. So just take a look at the side, make sure that when you turn it around, it looks pretty even, okay? If it's not, rub it on some sandpaper, just some long steady swipes, and that should soften it down just a little bit. Now I'm going to start off with a slightly smaller size ball burr than the one I'm going to finish with, the one to set the seat. This one right here is going to be, I think it's a 175. Sometimes it's best to do this in a vise. This was shown to me by Linda Searcy, who's an amazing and talented artist and stone cutter. Anyhow, so what you're going to do is you can put it in a vise or you can do it the way that I do it. It's completely up to you. And I like doing it this way. So I'm just going to go real small, get a little bit of burr life on there, real slow, and just kind of drill it down a little bit. I'm not moving fast. If you move too fast, everything's going to spin out of whack. Okay, so that should set the seat. And you don't want to go all the way down into the top of the burr, okay? Next thing we're going to do is switch over to the finishing burr. Same thing. This time I'm really only going to go about halfway in, all right? If that, just barely halfway in with the ball. Doesn't take very much. And then to check your stone height, you drop it. You have to drop it a couple times or it doesn't count. And then if it looks like, for example, the seat's not deep enough, you want to make sure that you can actually see that table sink in, or the girdle sink in. Now, this right here is just slightly still, not quite the right size. These Bosch burrs are not marked, and I haven't marked them, so that's my fault. So we're going to go to a slightly bigger one. That should work. Mark your ball burrs, trust me, because otherwise you're stuck doing what I'm doing. That whole cheating thing again, I swore I wouldn't do. Yeah, that's kind of part of it. Okay, so just a little bit. Again, I'm just going to go in a hair, okay? And don't get your fingers caught on here, okay? If you're going to do it this way. But for me, it just kind of helps keep it a little steady. So we're just going to go in, not even halfway. Really super duper slow. These are not made nor meant to go really, really quick. And I know some people that actually turn them in by hand, but my hands aren't quite steady enough for that. I'm just going to be open and honest in a minute. Okay, there we go. I dropped it more than once, so it's official. There we go. That's seated much more nicely in there. So one of the reasons why you would want to use a vise would be because you can actually sink it down a little bit easier. Now take a look at where the table is. That table is sitting just above the top of the setting, okay? If I was able to give you a closer look, you would see the girdle is sunk down very, very nicely, okay? So once you get your table seated in there nicely, everything looks nice, it looks even, it looks level, then we're gonna go ahead and cut the tube, okay? Fun part's getting these out. There we go. Okay, so next we're gonna go ahead and cut up the tube, okay? As you can see, I have a little stone sitting on the inside there. The table's flush up against this little plate right here on the inside. This is your, what they call a tube cutting vise. They're available on Amazon, they're available in Rio Grande. You can find them anywhere, just search for tube cutting vise, okay? So anyhow, I have the table pressed up against this side right here, and I can see that there's plenty of room for the actual culet to be seated inside of that that tube. All right, and the way that you're going to mount this, another good way to do this is to take a set of calipers with the 2mm stones. My rule of thumb for this particular one, because I'm familiar with it, is this right here loosens it, okay? This right here tightens it. So if you need to move it out and extend it, and this right here is where you saw. So if you're going to cut a fairly long tube, yada yada, you get it? So for the 2mm, my rule of thumb is all the way closed, just because I know this one and I know what'll fit. On the other hand, though, you can take yourself a set of calipers and measure the space in between. Give yourself just a little bit extra on the off chance that you don't quite get it sawed all the way even. So this is a GRS bench pin setup with a, it's a different aftermarket bench pin. You can use just about anything. You just want to make sure that you can actually butt it up against it. So you put your tube in and you fold this this little holding lever over, and you put your thumb down on it and you can press down on it. Now you're not actually, and there's probably not going to be any circumstances where you end up denting your tube, so you really don't have to worry about that. But you want to get a really good firm grip, okay? Get your burr life on your saw blade and try and saw it down as evenly as possible. This is not a race. You don't have to go very fast, and oftentimes these tubes are going to come popping right out. Sometimes you have to chase it. Other times you get lucky. Now it's cut all the way through, okay? Now here's the thing. Now that you have this new piece right here, this new fresh piece, do the same thing, because I can already see, I don't know if you can, but I can already kind of see that that's not completely even all the way around. So if I was going to cut another one of these, I'd have to do the same thing with the sandpaper and swipe it across the sandpaper to level it, set a new seat into it, do the same thing all over again, and then cut your piece out again, okay? Okay, so for this next part, now that we actually have the seat cut on, right, you want to go ahead and try and flush up the bottom. Sometimes there's going to be a burr there from sawing. I've heard of people using erasers to do this. I would be very careful, because you don't want to fold in the sides of the bezel walls. It should hold pretty steady, but I just use my hands and give it a couple little scrapes. Sometimes it'll flip on you if you're not careful, but just make sure that you get that burr off, okay? And what this is also going to do is it's going to provide a nice seat for contact for your solder. So we're going to do that to both of these. What makes it nice is that these little guys, they're going to stick right on your thumb. Okay, so just 2 or 3 swipes, nothing major. All right, since I'm going to be doing ear wires on there, I'm going to use some 20 gauge. It's kind of my go-to. This is 20 gauge. Here is your item number for Rio Grande, in case you're curious. You could always just do a search. First of all, you got to find the end. So I'm going to cut off about 2 inches. I'm not even going to really measure it, but that way I've gotten enough to where I can go ahead and cut it off if I really need to later, and trim it up. So I'm going to cut off about 2 inches. And you get a file. And I'm just going to go ahead and file one of the ends flush on both of these. And we're going to do, you can do a couple things with it once you get past this point. I've seen people who will take some round nose pliers and they will curl this end up, and it gives it a lot of really nice contact. So I can show you that. And then another thing that you can do is you can hammer the end flat, and that's usually what I do, is just hammer the end flat, but just because we'll do both. Okay. My round nose pliers are upstairs, so flat nose works just as well. But you see how all I'm doing is I'm just kind of gripping right where I just turned and then turning it some more. Okay, and then we'll do the next one and match it. Kind of get it a little start here. I'm going to do both of these at once just because it's just that much easier. Here we go. And then just turn them and fold it over. If you're worried about leaving marks on your metal, I usually don't because I can polish them out. But if you're worried about leaving marks on your metal, you can always get some tool magic, but I found that eventually it just kind of flakes off anyways. Okay, so there we go. We got that. Now what I'm going to do is straighten it out. That way it goes straight up. Just straighten it out a little bit. Okay, I have a little riveting hammer here. You can use just about anything. And just for fun, what that'll do is it'll really provide a nice little contact for your, to solder onto the back of your earrings. Remember, it's metal art, you guys. We are not professional jewelers. We are professional lovers of metal art. So there we go. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and take these over and I'm going to solder them to the back. Okay? So it'll have a lot of nice little contact, and then we can move on to setting the tubes, or soldering the tubes on. Alright, so this is a soldering block I picked up from Kent's Tools, and this is a hard compressed charcoal block that I use. The first thing that I'm going to do, oh, and underneath here is an annealing pan. The stuff that looks like kitty litter is actually vermiculite. It's really good for annealing, but I like putting my soldering stuff on it because I can turn it. This is the 12-inch pan. I have the 7.5 as well. You can pick those up off from Amazon. Okay, just look up annealing pan off from Amazon, and a lot of times they'll come with a nice little third hand that attaches to the side. I am not, while I get this on there and get set up, I am not in a third hand kind of person. The reason for it is because I don't need it. My hands aren't the steadiest, but I found that it takes longer for me to set up the third hand than it would for me to just steady myself and solder it. And a quick tip on steadying your hands. This is a little bit big, so we need 2 of them anyway. So quick tip on steadying your hands is tuck your elbows in, and if you really need to, brace your fingers someplace, okay? Someplace where it's obviously not going to get heat. I've been known to put my thumbs together and be able to brace them that way. Okay? So, you know, there's nothing wrong with third hands. I think that they're great, but I just don't need them. So, anyhow, another thing I know a lot of people use is your flux brushes. I just use my soldering pick, and we're going to be doing a little bit of pick soldering, so we're going to get you guys in on that. The reason why I use my soldering pick, though, is because I can get it anywhere I want to. I don't have to worry about burning it off. I'm not very good at using, and I can just control how much is going on to my piece to begin with. So anyhow, so there's that. We've got our solder right here. We're going to go ahead and show you guys how to pick solder these together. Okay, really quick, we're going to go over my torch setup. This one is called a Smith Handy Heat or Smith Silversmith. I picked and it just comes with the hose, the regulator, and then you get some tips that come with it. Now here's the thing, this is not oxygen. Okay, I got this one for acetylene. Acetylene is, the tank itself initially is fairly cheap, but anytime I want to go in and have it refilled, it's cost me like 30 bucks. And this particular tank, it lasts me forever, okay? Now, because this one doesn't have oxygen in it, it's called ambient air, and what happens is it actually draws oxygen from the atmosphere, okay? You can adjust your, when you go to turn it on, which I won't do because I don't have a tip on. When you go to turn it on, you just get one of these little keys that you can pick up for like $2, and you crank it on. And I try and keep my actual, this right here is my, my hose pressure. I try and keep my hose pressure just up over 10, between 10 and, usually 10 and 12. Right now it's between 12 and 13. And then this right here, it just tells you how full your tank is. So I'm about half full right now, okay? For the tips, here's the difference between the Smith Handy Heat and the Smith silversmith. The silversmith is going to come with these smaller tips. Okay, the handy heat is more for brazing, and it's going to come with these larger tips. I use this larger one right here. I primarily use it for casting. Okay, so we don't need that one. This next larger one, I use it when I'm putting the rails on my cups. Sometimes I'll switch over to the larger one, but you know, this is kind of for larger projects. Okay. For some of the work that I'm going to be doing today, I'm going to be sticking with the 00 and the 01. I probably won't even need this. I think it's a 02. Probably won't even need that one today. Okay, so I'm going to be sticking with these two and very likely going with the 01. Okay. Okay, so pick soldering. First thing you'll notice is that the end of my pick itself is curved. There's actually a really good reason for that for me. If I can get it someplace where you can see it. I actually curve the end of it because I like to be able to touch it down. It just kind of gives me more room to work, okay? So I went ahead and cranked on my torch. What I'm going to do is I'm going to heat up the end of the pick itself until it's red hot, and then touch it down on top of the flux. The flux is going to melt, or on the solder. The solder is going to go ahead and melt, and then what's going to happen is the flux that your pick is seasoned with is going to adhere to it, and it cools off almost instantly as soon as you take the heat away. And then you've got a little ball of solder that's kind of stuck on there. So now that we've already got our flux on there, we want to make sure that it's flown. Okay, and then once the flux is finished, then we'll just kind of transfer that over. Just heat your tip up a little bit and drop it down onto the other hotter part. Now this is called sweat soldering. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and flow that solder. There it goes. And then what I'm going to do, since this part right here, the little piece that I'm soldering on, the ear wire, since it already has some flux on it, I'm going to go ahead and flow that flux, brace my hand, heat up the back plate, and kind of get it where I want it to go. Now there is a little bit of a trick too with flux that you guys should know. When it gets hot, it gets sticky. So as hot as it is, I can go ahead and stick it to this back plate, and then it'll hold there for me so it doesn't really move too much. Takes a little bit of practice and a little bit of getting used to. So just go ahead and line everything up. Now you notice that I'm keeping my torch off the ear wire, like completely off the ear wire until that solder flows. Once the solder flows, I'll give it a little flash and hold it still. Okay. As soon as I'm sure that the solder itself is flown and it's hardened back up a little bit, then I'll move it around. All right. So there we go. Now I'm going to go ahead and clean these up. We'll solder on the actual little settings that are going to go on there. And then we'll get them finished up, and I'll show you how to set the stones. All right, so for this next part, what I'm going to do is I've got my setting and a pair of cross locks. All right, it's really important for you to make sure that you know which side is the top. It's obviously the side with a bigger hole on it. So, and hey, don't knock it. I've done it. I know other people that have done it too and soldered settings and bezels on backwards. It's just a thing. It happens, you guys. Trust me. Sometimes it takes doing things like that a few times to learn to watch out for it. So I'm just going to give you all a heads up. I'm using an easier paste solder. That was hard solder that I had used to tack on the actual ear wire. So I'm just using a little bit of an easier paste solder because paste solder spreads a little bit thinner. I like it better for bezels. Being as how the ear wire itself has a structural component to it, and this one really doesn't. It's more decorative. Then all I'm going to do is use some paste solder. So paste solder, it spreads thinner, it becomes more brittle. Regular chip solder really doesn't, because paste solder actually has the flux and everything and a burnable organic compound on the mixed into it. So it'll spread wider, it'll spread thinner, which is actually kind of good for bezels because you want to make sure it spreads all the way around. And I didn't put very much there in the middle. So then I'll line it up where I want it to go. Just someplace where it just kind of looks fairly even. All right, I'm going to strike on the torch. Now you're going to notice that I'm going to try and keep my heat again as far away from the ear wire as possible. I'm also going to try and keep it off the bezel. What that's going to do is it's actually going to limit where your heat can actually go. Well, what does that leave us? That leaves us 3 sides, right? Now obviously you're still going to have to heat the back, or this side right here up with the ear wire as well. But what we're going to do is, if there's a way that I could just show you where the heat transfers, I would. But I'm going to start with this back side and just kind of horseshoe it around. Okay. But primarily I'm going to keep the heat focused on the back side, because what's going to happen is that heat's going to transfer and it'll move its way up. Okay, so you see how I'm mostly heating up that part, that back part, and then I'll just kind of give it a little whirl around. Once that tube starts to glow, take the heat away. And if your solder hasn't completely flown by then, I'd be surprised. I get a lot of questions regarding being able to solder onto a back plate that's been textured really deeply like this. So obviously it's not going to have a point of contact all the way around like a good bezel actually should. But again, this is decorative, it's not structural. And as long as it has good points of contact where it can, then you're going to be fine. All right, so I used a wire wheel from Dremel just to go ahead and clean off the zinc coating from the flux, or from the pickle. The pickle is important because it cleans all the flux off and any other impurities, right? But it also leaves a zinc coating. So I just used a wire wheel and just kind of went around everything, being very careful not to hook it onto the bezel itself. Did the same thing with the ear wires. Now what's left is there's a little bit of hammer mark on there, right? From when I'd hammered that flat. So this is a silicone wheel. It's a brown silicone wheel from Rio Grande's Advantage Plus kit. And I'm just going to go ahead and clean that up a little bit. Okay. Now the other thing I'm going to do is just very lightly go around the outside so nothing actually catches. Okay. So there's that. Now the next thing I'm going to do to polish it is I'm going to switch to the green wheel, because ordinarily I could throw this into a tumbler and it'll clean and polish it really nicely. I can't do that because my tumbler's broken. So I'm going to go ahead and take a fine silicone wheel and just kind of give it a nice little shine. So this next part can actually be a little bit tricky. If you're a beginner, I recommend using a file and being very, very careful. Or you can try your hand at this as well. This is how I do it. Okay, I've been doing this for a long time. But it's possible. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to take this brown wheel, the silicone wheel from the Advantage Plus kit from Rio. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of very lightly go around the edge of the bezel at a 45. Now the reason for that is because right now the top of the bezel is pretty flat and I want it to be tilted at an angle. Okay, if you grind too much off, your bezel is going to be uneven. Okay, this is much easier to do on bigger bezels. I recommend trying this on a bigger stone first. But if once you get pretty good at it, or you feel pretty confident that you can give this a try, then you can. So all I'm going to do is just very, very lightly and very, very slowly take a little bit off at a time until you see and see how I'm just kind of going all the way around it until you see that lip itself fade off into an angle. And it's just rounding it a little bit. This makes it easier to fold over. It gives you more metal to work with. It's a little hard to do with the camera in my face, but there we go. There we go. So now it doesn't have quite such a lip to it. Okay, it's definitely rounded off a little bit. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and put the stone in. There's a couple ways that you can do this. I lick my finger and make the stone stick like this. And then meet them together. Now it's kind of important at this point that you make sure that your stone's in there all the way and that it's flush. Because if it's not, it's going to sit crooked. Okay, and the table should be sitting just over the very top, okay? Which means that the girdle is seated down inside where the bezel is. Now, there's another way that you can do this. This is sculpting wax. This is a tip, little tip from a friend of mine. Here's your part number for it for Rio. You can actually just break a little piece of this off and then whittle it down to a tip and use it to set your stone, to, pop your stone into. But for these little guys, I just lick my finger. Now there's a couple different options when it comes to using these bezel setting punches. They have, obviously we're setting a 2mm stone, right? So what we have is a 2mm punch. That's not what we're using, okay? 2.25, it won't fit over the outside. 2.5 will fit over the outside, but just barely. I'm going to start with the 2.75, okay? So I'm going to give it just a little bit bigger. Now, I've heard a lot of people say that they just punch it down and hammer it in. I tried that. This got stuck. I've, tried doing the wiggling it around. That doesn't work so well because what'll happen is the lip of the punch will get set. Sometimes it'll get stuck on the bezel and it'll dent the bezel. So all I'm going to do is set that down over the top. I'm going to push down and turn. Okay, I might give it a little wiggle, but not a very big one. Okay. Now I'm going to switch over to the 2.5. Same thing, just turn. Okay. Now, this isn't going to finish your bezel. Okay. We're going to grab something else and then we're going to show you how to actually finish the bezel. I'm going to show you why. Because what'll happen is the inside of this is actually going to taper that bezel up, but you still have to finish it. All right, so this is it's a curved burnisher. It's from Rio Grande as well. And all I'm gonna do, now that I already have a bulk of the bezel itself has been curved over, all I'm gonna do is just very, very gently, I'm gonna start on one side. And you notice I'm not going all the way in or anything, I'm just trying to lay it flat. And you'll see the stone is still gonna be loose in there. So I'm gonna do one side. And then I'm gonna do the other side. Now, if you see the stone wiggling, you can always set your finger down on top of it. And then I'm going to do the same thing around, going all the way around. I'm going to do my 4 corners, just like changing a tire. And what this is going to do is it's actually going to go ahead and set that stone right in. It's going to go ahead and grab a hold of it. Okay, and then at this point, then I'll go ahead and lift it up and go back around. And this will burnish it right on over. All the way around. But you notice how I'm lifting it up now, so it's kind of folding it in. And that, now that you feel over the top of it, the stone's not going to move, okay? You're not feeling any lip or anything like that on there, okay? Now, the last thing that I'm going to do, just to kind of give it a nice little polish, is I'm going to switch back over to that really extra fine silicone wheel. And just kind of even out the polish a little bit. Here we go. And you went ahead and bezel set a stone. That's it. So now what I'll do is I'll curve up the ear wire, give it one final quick polish, and then we're done. All right, so if you guys noticed, I didn't actually do anything in straight or like make the ear wires or form them or anything like that. And there's a reason for it. You notice I'm stretching it out right now, or I'm straightening it. I'm straightening it and I'm kind of hardening it at the same time. What happens is you'll work harden it. But the reason why I didn't actually do anything with the ear wires is because they'll get in the way, okay? So what I'll do when I'm actually forming my ear wires is I will find something, and really honestly I look for literally anything I have in the studio that's going to work. So this right here should do a good job. And what I'll do is I'll just go ahead and I'll match them up evenly and then form them down. Sometimes I'll press them out, right? Just like this. And then finish forming them with my hand. And you can always trim the ends off. Just match them up. By the way, this is not my music. Pandora. So there we go, all done. And that's how you do it. And then you can go ahead and wear these around town. Now, if you wanted these to be a little bit shorter, you can always like raise it up a little bit higher or whatever, or trim the ends off, however you decide to do it. Okay, that's how I like to do it. So I hope you guys enjoyed this, and give it a try. Try it for yourself. Make yourself a nice pretty pair of earrings. You can do this on rings, you can do this on pendants, you can do this on just anything, okay? Take care.